Coming from a middle or lower middle class context to actually even imagine that this was a possibility, that the idea that intellectuals could gather in this place and live and work together and think this together was a completely, I mean, it was conceptually dreamland. It was something else entirely. But I began to realize, I mean, I remember we were remembering that famous line. I think we actually quoted it, that Marx on the leisure classes, he said that the truly radical ideas come from the leisure class. That the fact that you needed the role of the elite had a historical significance, and you had to work with those possibilities and the influence that they could create. So something like the Journal of Arts and Ideas had a kind of national leadership in large measure because it came from that kind of configuration. I was involved in journals in Bombay, for example, but never anything that had this diversity of contributors as well as this diversity of readers and intellectual thinking.
Before the slab had to be broken, there was performance in the pit, and Myra, Ayanla, and all performed before the stage was made. Then Prasanna came and did Shakuntala. So I think that the backdrop itself, because in the evening you get the sun coming, you have the valley below, you have Chandigarh which you can just about see, and then the lights come on. So there's a whole spatial and optical environment that forms the backdrop that you then in some way internalize as part of the experience of being in Kasauli. So I think that this uh, aspect of that informal, as well as I said, the house Ivy Lodge itself, unlike most of the other houses, that this house was actually the guest house of the bishop who had the house above. And that's a really solid house with the room set in. And this is, much more khulla, open. My mother got it open and I opened it even more. So it was very easy, that they're not four big grand rooms. There are two nice grand rooms, but it was much more porous and allowed different kinds of presences to be there, and that this environment, the 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 different aspects of coming into the house. Now in the summer, if you talk about environment, the summer in the afternoon, at about 2 or 3 o'clock, a very strong wind blows, and it blows at great speed. And there were on more than one occasion, but in 1980, the fire started, and once the fire starts and it turns the corner and the pine needles are below, it blows so strongly that the house can almost, come down. And it almost happened. Everybody left the house, and the smoke was there. And I thought, when we went to the club, that when I come back, I'll only see everything charred. But luckily, the wind turned and the house got saved. So that's was a bit, but it's a very dramatic experience to see it. In fact, when Nasreen came, she didn't want to be in the camp. She just wanted to come with me. So she was sitting in the veranda, and then she was going on sitting. And then we came, and then there was a ring of fire around the house above because it starts like that. And she just stared at it, like it was such a beautiful thing, that is, of course, famous that fires do create this beauty. So there is this, I mean, all hill stations have the environment aspect to it, but because of the different layerings of the house, the two levels of the outhouses, and the stage and the steps, it creates a kind of very easy tiered, going up and down, and I think that also constitutes to the sort of openness of of the space.
Jogain was a much more ardent, um, even than me, votary for traditional forms, and but he saw it perhaps in slightly different ways than me. And we used to have these amazing jokes about that between the, gosh, now that's a loaded term, lotus and the, the European rose. I remember when we were in Germany, we used to talk about this. No, these are just in jokes, but yeah, he was the one who would be much more specific than me about non-acceptance of Western aesthetical value. Much more than me. I mean, for me, there's never any rejection of any of these. So for him, there was. We were thinking together and thinking against and thinking, but the main thing was that we were thinking together. That was that there was space for us to be able to say these things. I mean, I was sitting there with Marxists like Divan, Sudhir, Gita, having to fend for myself, give me some kind of understanding of what I was doing. It was a learning experience for all of us to get into each other's shoes and think through the other person, and that perhaps is the base of what collaboration is about. As far as my art practice goes, very specifically, it gave me an understanding of scale, which I had earlier admired but never been able to be part of. So, and of projection. This is something that, I came from my earlier work was all about very personal things. And I in a sense, it is not a question of abandoning that notion of intimacy, but of projecting it into another kind of space. And I think that's what the theatre workshop, or the plays that we did, whether it was My Kapit or Rao later, it helps me understand that a little bit more. And the other way around, I was already begun to work on a larger scale. So I had the kind of little bit the wherewithal to deal with these. But I would say it was a learning experience, and I practically learnt all my craft on the go there. I was for a short time a performer. That's the extent to which we switched roles. I had never worked in front of people before, and here I was painting away to glory in front of friends who could be in and out of my working space. Workshop with the Germans, I think that was the beginning of the debate about working with the avant-garde, was reworking with traditional language. And I won't use the word traditional here because I don't like it so much, historical. Now, I think that though I had been committed myself in some ways for quite a long time ago to try and explore the languages that I could develop out of historical precedents in India or in Asia, but I think there was some thinking that was happening here because I've been pushed through dialogue, through argument, about the kind of critique of that notion. And I remember that I would sit in the evening and as we talked, I had to formulate myself in ways that I had not been pushed to before. And I think that was the first time that I like to use the word additive. And for me, that's since then been a touchstone, that my work is not about being brought together and unified. It is about being additive, and that the structure too comes from a process which is additive. Now I could relate that in a workshop situation. I could relate that. It bore testimony to the ideas that I had. And I remember we had very kind of strong dialogues about this, and it was by saying not this, not this, not this that I kind of was able to formulate my mind, and probably for others as well.
When you enter that space, you can feel art in the floor, in the walls, in the fireplace, in the carpet, in the lumpy sofas, There is something about, have Akbar Padamsir sat there and Gaitonde was having his drink in that corner. There's a sense things should remain untouched, especially when they contain memory and history and experiences. You go to Stratford-on-Avon, where Shakespeare lived, his writing table, or the pub where Balzac sat. So all those things, become places of reverence. Dining table is it's a very contested space. It's a space where people, whether you take it in a family scenario, where arguments, where intimacies, where all kinds of things are shared. And nothing was more powerfully utilized than the dining space in Kasauli Art Centre, where we all sat till late at night. People are sitting on the floor, they are sitting on those days they were stronger, the antiques. Now, 32 years later, they're a little weakened, I suppose. They'd sit on the little consoles, and there's that other side table. So it was jam-packed. People were standing, leaning against the wall, against the kitchen door, against the store, stuffed into the store, where they are talking and you're listening to people talk about art or a moment in that painting, or that the positioning of the bird and whether it should have shifted, talking about color. It was like if it had been recorded and documented, it would become such an amazing document on artists talking about the work of other artists. Unfortunately, it is only part of the memory, and memory as much as you can recall. But there were some really vital conversations that were taking place continuously. There are two ways of looking at hospitality. When I think of the hospitality of Kasauli Art Centre, food was cooked, it was placed. Everyone became a host. There was no role playing there was no claiming or proprietorial air that Vivan and Geeta manifested कि मेरा घर है, आप मेरे घर में हैं, ये rules है, ये regulations है. It's invisible codes that you assert in the atmosphere. But with Geeta and Vivan, it never existed. They didn't claim it. And I think that's why everyone was so easy. That kind of ease comes when you say, we are in it together. Who's the host? Who's the guest? We've dissolved that. You are all the host and you're all the guests. So you went to the kitchen, said, ek aur phulka le aao, phulke kam ho rahe ho. Or you saw a dish was getting, you picked it up and you said, thoda sa aur dal do, and you brought it. What your role was, you were as much a guest. Everyone did that. It was the energy of the place. It was the unwritten ease that they released in the atmosphere.
People like us who had no idea about other artists, we came in contact with any other. For example, I was very impressed by D.L. Energy. But just past and me. He in the drawing room of Vivan put his easel and painted his drawing room, which included an original painting of Amrita. I thought it was quite an original piece of art, painted with great, dexterity and skill. To me, myself, we are people who are light-hearted. We are serious only the moment we paint. But after painting, we are ordinary human beings. We love to pull others' legs, make jokes about others, and things like that. So that is a part of my character. Now I can't reform myself. I'm already 88. So you just see it and enjoy. It is all done without any malice. It was Viva's birthday idea. We made the whole house as a model. Paper cut myself and Sanelli. We made paper cut portraits of almost all the participants and put them in windows, showing the rooms and things like that.
So, in the popular parlance, you would say, what are the takeaways? For me, there are two major gains that I made, and I would put it this way. One was painting and simultaneously writing. I had a model before me, my own mentor, K.G. Subramanian, who was both a painter and a writer. I know it was frowned upon earlier by many a painter, saying that writing is not your business. You should stick to what the business of painting is. But that is one thing that came to Kasauli in a manner, in a slightly different, that I used to write in my mother tongue, Gujarati. I wrote on art. I also read poetry, but that's different matter. But I wrote on art, number of essays. But I had begun to write in English. And that began around 1969 when Bhupen Kakkar and I began editing a journal called Vrishchik. It was also a lesson in learning English. So we were doing that. But writing in English was a huge challenge because I was not grown up with English. I grew up with Gujarati and at the most Hindi. English was a learnt language. So I had to find a way to deal with it. How to? But I managed. And I wrote an article. And I think before it was published in Journal of Arts and Ideas, as you mentioned, I wrote a piece called Viewer's View. It is looking at 3 works of art. I was a teacher for a long period of time and I used to talk about art. So first was Las Meninas by Diego Velázquez, that is an easel painting. The second was a painting called House of Sheikh Phul, a Sufi, by an artist called Bishan Das, a Mughal painter of the Jahangir period. The third was a mural by Binod Bihari Mukherjee in Hindi Bhavan in Shantiniketan. All 3 different periods. And I attempted to do that. And I tested the waters. It was in Kasauli, and I found that I had many people, who would respond. So that was the first lesson that I learned from Kasauli. The second was, and this was an ongoing dialogue that we had with Gita and with Vivan about the role of politics in art. And we all were actually brought up on a kind of our education did not include politics. Whatever there was in Baroda, there was its own politics. That means Subramanian was Gandhian, etc., but nobody spoke about politics. It was the first time that with Vivan we started actually arguing about politics. And so the Journal of Arts and Ideas was the later forum. But before that, before the exhibition called Place for People took place, we had intensive debate. And Kasauli, in a way, consolidated it. That art cannot remain oblivious of politics. And that is something which was another a major gain, I would say that. When I think of Kasauli Art Centre, or I just think of Kasauli, the place, and whatever happened there the 4 times that I've been to, and if I were to ever put it in one single word for Vivan, the artist that he was, this was also an art making project. It was not just making symposia, it was not just bringing artists together, but being an insider and in fact initiating all kinds of not just dialogue, all kinds of things that he did, right from building some kind of a corner of a and थोड़ा रिपेयर करना हो तो वो भी साथ में करने का हो वो भी हो जाए so that means it was a totality that man was actually making a big work of art. And in a way, Kasauli appears to me like that this is what we want. So he made many an installation, we know that, but Kasauli began much earlier. Well, if I were to speak about it, I can go on speaking for half an hour or more. But I think the best thing that I would think of is that it created a space different than home. It created a space different than pedagogical center. It created a space different than a political arena. It created perhaps multiple spaces. And so everyone, each one of us had a place in it. At the same time, we could move from one into the other. So would you move from political space into the pedagogical space? And could you move from that to quote unquote artistic space, the artists, what they were making. There were artists who were also painting. Bhupen Kakkar painted there. I also did some painting. Now that was a kind of an experiment which no other art camp in the country had attempted. And this is what Kasauli did. So you could, in your own way, it left this open to you. So if you were to move from one into the other, so if you were to be interested in, let us say, dialogue, and here is, a thinker, political thinker who is speaking about, do artists sit and listen to such things? Normally we don't. But in this space, we had all three. We had pedagogy, we had politics, and we had the art discourse. So all three were available and in a way put together in a manner where each one was initiated into the other. I had some interest in politics, but I developed much greater interest after being there. I'm sure that many friends of mine also must have felt. I would not be surprised if they would come and say that, well, Kasauli taught us something. So it was not just a little place where you went to learn, you went to live there. So it was also a lesson in living together, fighting, debating, and all kinds of crazy things that you could do. It could be part of it. So it is how do I say, a package as a whole. I'm speaking in a very popular parlance, but in a way it was all there. I remember singing with Ashish Rajadhyaksha a song from Om Darbadar. I don't know whether you remember that. We went on. So there were such light moments where we were completely free of all tensions. And we were all ears when somebody was speaking on certain issues. We were all very much looking at what Vivan was doing around with the buildings and whatnot. And we also knew what our other artist friends, the theatre persons, were doing. So in a way, it was a kind of an experience which was most, I would say, either unique or most unusual. So I brought back with me lots of memories with that.
When Anuradha asked me if I would be willing to be part of a collective which had some searches in feminist terms of creating theatre together, I was both a little scared but actually immensely gratified. That Vivan made this possible and that then he stepped back and let Anu conceive it in entirely her own ways, and not just Anu, but all of us getting together and conceiving something speaks all about Kasauli, all about Vivan. And it's the other thing that before I get into what working in this theatre workshop did for me, I should mention the other workshops that I have attended in Kasauli. They were very special, and I'm full of a lot of wonderful memories and for them. But in some sense, the primary thing that perhaps I received from those workshops was now what Anu has made clearer for me, was the notion of atmosphere. I think that for a painter, that's again a great, it's a common term. We use it. We understand atmosphere. But again, there was, I think, at a certain time, again, a guilt about it, that you don't submit your work to what is perceived as atmosphere in the visual arts. I think that what Kasauli did for me was not just, I mean, I know that as a painter, I know that, say, for instance, if I'm in the hills, and I do have a place in the hills I often go to, I start a painting there. The light and air and everything over there is such that I cannot bring that painting back to the plains and do it. So, for me to understand that in theatre there's a recognition of that is very, very gratifying. And I think I'm putting together retrospectively my thoughts about the earlier workshops, and that I think that an understanding of what atmosphere means in a work of art, even if it is figurative, it is abstract, it is whatever, it is something that is integral and very important to me. Now, I think I should now get on to talking about what the theatre workshop did for me. I think the first thing it did for me was to free myself the responsibility of creating alone. And I think that's wonderful for a painter, that whatever you do is not about you. It is about what other people are going to do with it. And it's never ending. It goes round and round. It is like if I create a mise-en-scene and then there is an actor acting in front of it, it is his body or her body that makes that whatever visuality I've created come alive. It doesn't have a meaning without that. And that's sort of, in a way, such a reassuring thought in a way, you know, that you're in this together, you're responsible together, and that you are creating something that you don't have to bother about it being yours, authentic, original, or anything, because it is all about all of you, and there are no eyes here. So that, I think, was, and in a way, I should say that has fed into my work, in my own later work. There has been this great interest in working with other people's hands and eyes and minds. Whether it is, I use sometimes in my work the Sanji stencils of a master craftsman from Mathura. It is a one-sided collaboration somewhat, I do know, but it gives me the opportunity to use somebody else's worldview in my work. And that's, I can tell you, that's very gratifying. I've also worked with craftsmen from Kashmir in making a very large mural. I would not have been able to do it had I not previously had this experience of working on a collaborative. How not to tell people what to do. I mean, it is the thought of that you're sitting together and the work emerges together, that you talk, you show, you share images, you do things together, and then something comes up and there is something created, then an adjunct is created, and then maybe a contradiction is created. But there is a whole process of that kind of making that it all started perhaps in Kasauli in the making of Naika Bhed. There is another thing that I should talk about my fears, is that when Anuradha asked me that to do this, I said, how will I go and create all those big things that I want to paint? So there was also the need to have somebody with me who was more hands-on, and I'm thinking of people that I know sitting over here who have helped me create the things that I visualize, I've painted, but make them into what they are. So I've just only painted them. They're made by many of us. I think there's another way that this theatre workshop brought meaning into my life. Again, I was sitting in Baroda. I was working, thinking of certain ways in which I could investigate the feminist. And I think it happened almost accidentally by my trying to reclaim my life as distinct from the life of other people around me, and painting my children or my neighborhood or my family or my home became a way of my being able to do that, and that was not acceptable to many people, but it opened up for me many a way of going forward. But then I was feeling alone. It was a time when there was a lot of feminist activism in metropolitan cities, but not in Baroda. And I was feeling quite alone. And again, when I was asked to be in a workshop with activists, feminists, it was for me such a learning experience. And it also taught me, I'd say that straight away, to move from the victim image of the Champa series I created of a dowry burning incident into looking at the writings of poetry of women who could be role models, who could be inspirational. And that too, I think, sitting and talking, not only in Kasauli, but also in the workshop that we had before Kasauli, opened a new area of feminism for me. Susie Tharil's book, Women Writing in India, came out around that time, and that, as everybody knows, became many of our sitting on our desks all the time as our Bibles. These are the ways in which Kasauli has done what it did, and there's one other big way, is that working in an open space like that and creating things for an open space gave you an understanding of scale that perhaps was unlimited, and that always remains an unfulfilled inspiration to be able to create something for Kasauli.